what do you think is the biggest factor between the rich and the poor? What's the distinction between what the rich do and the poor don't? More than 1/3 of US wealth inequality can be accounted for by differences in financial knowledge alone. That's according to the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, which is a huge, huge reason why we, SP0 Finance, believe that financial literacy is extremely important. And it's one of our top missions as a company, and why we have amazing partners like Ali Zafar, who's going to talk about this particular subject. I honestly believe this is a gift. This is a legacy gift that you can give to your children, and it can make a significant difference. Those are two things to keep in mind, and I hope you can put this into context of the next 60 minutes or 90 minutes that you're investing your time with us, and you walk away with some tools to address these things.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So as Naeem mentioned, very used to snowballs. We're from the UK. It's summer here, so which means we still actually saying that we've had a few days of sunshine, so I shouldn't complain. But I just saw the news today. We're about to get another cold spell. So yeah, we're used to a very different kind of environment than you guys. The purpose of today is just to take a step back from some of the fantastic information that Brother Siddiq covered, and is to cover essentially one of the foundations of financial education. So to introduce myself and LifeSmart, we're one of the partners working with SP0 Finance in their mission to kind of really provide value to the community when it comes to real differentiated products for many Muslims who have been struggling or finding themselves excluded from how the financial space works. We're their partner focused on helping them with the education side, and that focuses on helping people engage with concepts that are beneficial to them and that ultimately lead to, just to summarize it, we have a series of tools, games, videos, resources, some of which you can access through the specialist SP0 portal that we will show you later on. But the purpose of today is to cover a few concepts around net worth. Now, Naeem asked at the beginning of the call, what do you think is one of the most important concepts when it comes to differentiating between wealthy people and people who might be struggling financially? When it comes to money, one of the things that we always say is it's not just about being wealthy. It's not about rich versus poor, but the concept that really matters to everyone is financial freedom. What everyone should be targeting is a position where they feel financially free. Many people will say money doesn't buy happiness. There's an Islamic basis towards that as well. But on the other side, anyone who's struggling will talk about the challenge of not being able to feed your kids, not being able to move jobs, not being able to find work that is something that you enjoy, not being able to live a lifestyle that is even in line with your Islamic values. All of those feed into elements of what we kind of put under financial freedom. Your goal should not necessarily be absolute wealth for the sake of it. It should be working towards something where you gain more financial freedom. Now, one of the most important factors in that is a net worth, or your net worth. This is important because for many people, when they think of money, success, wealth, they think of their earning. They think, what is my salary this year? What could it be in the future? How much money will I earn? But earning is not the same as building something. There are many, many stories of NFL players, famous celebrities who end up going bankrupt very quickly after their career. And that is because earning is not the same as building. A high income does not guarantee that you will either be wealthy or that you will sustain that wealth for a long period of time. What your net worth does is it shows you your immediate position. It's almost like a health check at that moment in time. It shows you a true view of your financial position, including everything you own and everything you owe. That can then be used to guide decisions and make better long-term calls. For example, like how much do you need to go to Hajj? Are you in the position to do that this year, next year, or do you need 10 years to do that? And importantly, when you start to see that long-term goal, you can make small decisions now, and those small decisions compound. Again, as Brother Siddiq showed through that chart, those small decisions over a long period of time can compound into very powerful mechanism. So in terms of net worth, it's very, very simple. Many of you already know this. Your net worth is simply the assets that you own minus the liabilities that you owe. For example, if your assets are 500,000, your liabilities are 250,000, your net worth at this moment is $250,000. Now, again, Extremely simple. There's no complication, there's no derivations. That is the net worth that is used whether you are starting off in your career or whether you are a client of a wealth manager who's managing millions, hundreds of millions, or billions. That is a figure used by everyone. That is your net worth. Now, the complication that arises is what exactly is an asset, what is a liability, and what happens at different stages, which we'll try and go somewhat into. Assets, some of the common ones that people know are your house. So that's usually the biggest thing. When you ask someone what their assets are, the first thing people usually think about, if they do own a house, is their property. They'll also think about savings and cash. They'll think about investments. So any ETFs you have, for example, SPUS, any Sukuks, any retirement savings, any pensions you may have, business equity. So if you have ownership in a business, whether that's your own business, whether you have invested in a family member's business and own equity there, and separately property. So if you have any real estate that you've invested in separate to your main residential house, a second property, a holiday home. Assets can also be other things that generally have a relatively large value. And we say relatively large value because in theory, everything is an asset, right? This glass is an asset. But if you try and list out every single thing that you own, that will, one, it won't be beneficial. Secondly, it will take a lot of time. And thirdly, it does not make a material difference to any decision or your current standing. So what constitutes a material difference is relative to your overall wealth. So obviously I cannot give that figure, but you'll be able to know yourself. Something that costs in the range of thousands of dollars upwards, something that actually makes a difference either now or in the future and brings you some kind of value, is considered an asset. So other things on there, many people have a amount of gold, whether that's an investment amount, whether that's personal jewelry, and so on, that could be considered an asset given the value of it, especially, over the last few years as we've seen the price of gold rise a lot. Liabilities are things you owe. So again, the simple ones that people know are loans, mortgages, anything that they've taken as a lending. So whether they've taken financing for cars, as we'll talk about later, essentially anything that you own that has to be paid back. And I say own because often liabilities are not always, but they're often against an asset. So what happens is you end up getting two sides of the same coin. The reason I bring that up first is because many people consider their assets in isolation without seeing the liability that it comes with. A perfect example is if I buy a house worth $1 million, on paper I could say, well, I have a house worth $1 million. I'm a millionaire. But if you bought that house with $900,000 of debt, you got a mortgage for $900,000, your equity in that house or your ownership of that house was only $100,000. So by excluding the liabilities, you've basically said, well, I own $1 million of assets. I'm a millionaire by that definition. And you are by the definition of assets. But by excluding your liabilities, you have not really looked at, one, what value of that house you truly own. And secondly, which is a crucial factor, liabilities come at a cost. All these liabilities that are listed there, perhaps with the exception of money owed to friends and family, and that comes with its own cost, have some kind of interest or cost assigned to it. We will later on talk about the halal options that SP0 Finance offers, where we remove the interest element from it. But just to be clear, a liability still needs to be paid back, and a liability will still have some element of cost to it. So you need to be very, very careful. Now, I wanted to bring that to life with an example of why net worth is important and why it's different from income. So two examples, you have Omar, who's earning $120,000 a year. His lifestyle means that the majority of his income is spent. His kids' private school fees, his car lease that he has, his lifestyle, eating out, going on holiday, putting a little bit into savings. He has a savings pot of $3,000. He's got a car that he's now paid off, but he's also taken a personal loan. And because of a lot of BNPL, which stands for buy now, pay later, and kind of general shopping that he does, he's actually got an overall negative net worth. Now, that doesn't bother him because he has a salary of $120,000, which means he gets $10,000 a month coming into his account, and that generally covers his costs, so he feels like he's fine. But compare that to Yusuf, who has a lower salary of $75,000, but he's lived a lifestyle where he's put more of that money into his savings, or maybe he inherited some of it, or maybe he had some luck with an investment, or maybe he sold a business. Whatever the starting point was, he has a savings pot of $35,000. He's managed to build up an investment portfolio of 42,000 and he's got a car worth 8,000 with no other loans. Now, that means his net worth is 85,000. If you look at those two figures in isolation, obviously the $85,000 figure is better, is healthier, he's got positive assets. The problem is many people within society and generally when they see their own finances and those of people around them, they consider the 120,000 a year figure and they'll say, well, I am in a high paying salary. And not only that, it's a pretty stable job. So it's 120,000 now, but I'll probably be promoted next year and the year after that. And that salary will continue to trickle upwards. And I've got all this time to do savings in the future because I'm doing well financially compared to the average salary. However, if you are not using that money to build your net worth, or if you're using it in a way that's actually leading to a negative net worth or a decreasing net worth, what you're doing is you're not moving yourself towards the key concept that we talked about, which is financial freedom, towards being able to make the decision like going to Hajj, towards being able to make the decision of, I don't quite like my job because it doesn't align with my values, so I'm going to go to a different job which might pay me less money but is more aligned. It will not allow you to build towards retirement. It will not allow you to build towards your kids' college fund, towards a holiday you might want to take. And that's the key concept with net worth. It is more insightful than purely looking at your income because it shows you your current view, but also where you want to go in the future, and especially towards financial freedom. So I will try and do this. I don't know if that's allowed, and I know. So this is one of the tools that we have at the moment. I'm not going to go through all of it. I just wanted to draw your attention to this part just because rather than me talking you through it and giving you a lot of theory, I wanted to give you a more interactive example of what it is. And feel free to follow along if you have a pen and paper, if you have an Excel document, anything, just roughly jot down. Now, when I say your net worth, this is a kind of assessment that you to do in your own time. It doesn't have to take any more than 5 minutes. It can take an hour or two if you want to get very accurate numbers. But remember, get started somewhere. Even if you spend a few minutes now on this call, even if you spend 5 minutes after this call and estimate every figure, please take the time to go and do this exercise for yourself. So start with your assets. What do you own? So this, for example, I can put some, placeholder figures. So if you have a house worth $600,000, okay, write that down. Usually for the majority of people, that's their biggest asset. If you've got savings, just open your bank account, check how much cash you have, check under the mattress. You might know this figure off the top of your head. You might say, well, I know I've got roughly 25,000. That's fine. Put that as an initial figure. Investments. Do you have any stocks? Do you have any funds? Do you have any other investment type assets that you've put aside? Again, use the apps that you might use. If you have a broker, call your broker. If it's a family grouped investment, find out what your share is and put an estimation for how many investments you have. Your vehicle, if you have multiple, add them up. Your approximate value of what the vehicle is. And again, this is not an exercise to try and tell anyone else or prove anything. It's for yourself to have what is the most accurate number that you can make a decision with. So don't go with the figure that you think the vehicle should be worth. Don't go with the figure that you bought it at because of depreciation. If you're not sure, type in the model onto Google, type it into ChatGPT, type into anything and find an approximate value of what that vehicle is or vehicles are. Add them together and put that as a figure. If you have a pension, as I mentioned, put a figure for that, and then anything else. You might have a second property that's investment. You might have some gold lying around worth a few $1,000s. And if you have other assets such as cryptocurrency, art, if you own a share in a business, if you have a side hustle, put all of those in. Then once you've done that, I'm going to give everyone 30 seconds. I know it's very tight. We're quite tight on time, but just a little bit of time to jot down or at least make a note for you to go and check these things later. Moving quickly on again. I know I'm not giving you a lot of time, just to give you a flavor. Next, it's your liabilities, your debts. What do you owe? So if that house that you had has a 450,000 mortgage against it, put that down. If you have a credit card balance of, I don't know, 6,000, if one of your car is on finance and you've got a, let's say, 7,000 loan, let's say you took out a 14,000 loan from the bank, and then you own a family member cousin loan, you owe him or her another, let's say, $4,000. Okay, put all of that in, write it down. Again, I will give you guys 15-20 seconds to take a look at what might be considered a liability. Anything that you have to pay back. One question that often comes up is, do I include the interest or the cost of the loan in the value of the loan? It depends how it is. So for example, if you have a house loan that is for 450,000, generally we put in your liabilities the figure that you owe back to the bank. We don't put your interest because the amount of interest that you'll pay back or the other cost If it is a traditional mortgage product, will be variable depending on how long you pay it back. So that generally goes into your expenses. If it is and we'll come on to this at the end of the webinar, if it's an Islamic finance product where the interest is not variable, but you have a fixed charge for taking out that loan, that can be put under a liability because you know exactly what you'll pay. It's not affected by interest rates. It will not go up or down. It's a pre-agreed interest cost of acquiring that debt, that you can consider that as part of your liability. Again, this is extra. If you want to do it, you can put down or keep a tally of, and most people know this. Let's say your monthly income of $7,500, your monthly expenses. This is where your cost of liabilities can go in. So your rent, your bills, any interest payments or otherwise cost of lending that you might have. So let's say it comes to $7,000. And then from that, you are given a net worth figure. Now, again, this is one interactive tool. The point is you do not need a tool to do this. I just need you guys to write this down for yourself, understand the different mechanisms. But I wanted to show you with this tool because I want to show you what you can do once you have that figure written down and how it can be used for forward planning, especially through some of the things that Brother Siddiq covered. So what the dashboard is doing is one of the things that I wanted to show you. Again, this is just purely to visualize something, is you can then use that net worth to do a forward-looking projection. Now, again, this is one example of something that we've done. If you use a realistic projection and you start at age 35, which is what this individual that we put in the data for, and has a net worth of 225,000, I believe his net worth figure is, yeah, 226,000 currently based on assets and liabilities. And we assume a relatively normal return of 5%. And these are some of the figures that go behind it. If we assume a return of 5%, and we focus on how much of their monthly income is surplus. So you do the income minus their spending and you look at the surplus. So for this individual, it's $226,000 today. They're saving roughly $6,000 per year based on how much of a buffer they have. So they had around $500 per month that they are not spending based on the figures that we put in, based on a conservative estimate of 5% per year, and then a more optimistic growth rate of 8%. And both of these are relatively lower compared to the long-term average return of the UK and the US stock market, even after inflation. So these are not, extreme numbers by any metric. Starting off at age 35, by age 70, realistically, you have about 1.8 million, and then optimistically, you'll have about $4.4 million. Again, these figures are just to bring to light what you can do with your net worth, provided you are tracking it, provided you are growing it, you are putting it in assets that are productive, and you are staying on top of that. So next, 3 ways to grow your net worth. Again, this is not rocket science. The concept behind it is really simple, and people always say, well, that's obvious, but it's easier said than done. That's true, but you have to start somewhere. Build your assets. So it is really important that you take the time to look at how much money comes in, your income, but how much of that is used to actually build your assets. If the majority, if not all of your income is used for maintaining your general expenses and you are not using it to purchase assets, then it is mathematically and financially and logically impossible for you to grow your net worth and actually reach that financial freedom or even get closer towards it. Secondly, reduce your liabilities. Liabilities put pressure on your lifestyle, they put pressure on your income. They are often the reason people end up in a situation of bankruptcy. It is rare. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head where people just run out of money. We talked about, I think the figure that I saw earlier today was that 15% of NFL players go bankrupt over a 12-year period after their career ends, right? 15. It's a staggering figure given the volume of money that they have in their accounts at the end of their careers or during it. And for many of them, it's not just from running out of assets. So it's not just from having a pool of money in your bank account and living a very extravagant lifestyle. Often it is liabilities that get out of hand, and the cost of those liabilities lead to a significant deterioration of their net worth figure and their overall financial. Thirdly, let time compound. Again, Siddiq covered this in detail. The most important concept in finance is time horizon, because if you remember the image of the graph that we showed you, no matter how much money you put in, the steepness of the graph will always be exponential, meaning that it will start off very slow and then shoot up at the end, right? Time allows you to get through that very shallow period and then get towards the thing at the end, okay? There's no way of skipping that. So if you are in a position where you think, right, this is something that will benefit me, don't wait to start in 6 months. Don't wait to start in next year. Do not wait until you have a huge amount of assets or a promotion or something else to start. Even a small action, whether it's $5, $10, $20, if you start with this today, it can start the habit and it can start the process of leading to something much better in the future. And then finally, the common things that actually keep net worth low and actually some of the misconceptions around it. One of the biggest factors is lifestyle inflation. It's something that affects everyone. So you start your career, you earn $50,000 given the area that you live in and your lifestyle, that just about covers your spending. And you think, okay, great, I'm making do right now, but in 3 years' time, the expected salary for my career in XYZ industry will be 80,000. That means I'm on 50,000 right now. I'll go up to 80,000 and I'll be able to save 30,000. And in 3 years, then that 30,000 will be used towards investment and I can grow my assets and so on. By the time they get there, in 3 years' time, they find that their lifestyle has crept to the rate where their income is now 80,000. And if you exclude taxes for a second, their income is 80,000. And without realizing their expenses are now 79,000 just because of the lifestyle inflation, the kind of restaurants they eat at, the holidays that they go on, the overall lifestyle they do. Maybe they've got kids, maybe they've got married, maybe because of inflation, generally speaking. So most people see the creep in their lifestyle as they start to earn more. It's something that is not necessarily a bad thing in the sense of, the purpose of money is to be enjoyed. You should use money as a medium of transferring value to yourself. You work very hard for it. You should use it to enjoy things. And if you end up in a situation with a higher salary and are able to access things you couldn't before, absolutely enjoy those. The issue is when overall your lifestyle grows in line with the increase in your salary. That's a problem when at the lower salary, you were not living in a way that was sustainable and that was leading towards growth. Now, if you had a salary of 50,000 and you were saving 10, 15,000 anyway, and you were building your asset base, like the example we gave with Yusuf, if you're doing that and your salary goes up and your expenses go up, that will not have as detrimental impact because you've already factored in a level of saving and investment into your lifestyle. It's when, and this happens for a lot of people, when they put off that for a higher salary, but as their salary increases, their lifestyle costs go up as well. The second thing, some of the other ones are there around ignoring small debts, not investing so they can not grow their money, not having an emergency fund. So if, God forbid, you lose a job, some emergency happens, there's some other unforeseen circumstance, you have to either take out more debt, which will have a hugely negative impact on your net worth, or you have to, for example, sell an investment that you might have, which because of the time horizon, you might sell something that is, let's just say if there's a financial crisis, you lose your job, you have to sell some of your shares. Because of the financial crisis, the value of the shares might be low, you make a loss on those shares and you get rid of the option of growing them in the future. So it can have a hugely detrimental impact if you don't have an emergency fund. And then the final thing I want to finish on is coming back to the difference between wealthier people and poorer people, or people that are more financially free and those who are not. It is, and this is going a level deeper. Once you've done this exercise, the next level is looking at what assets that you have. So the composition of your assets, which is what I put in the chat. There's an example of how much money wealthy people spend on extravagant purchases that just sound ridiculous, whether that's handbags or watches or spending a week on a yacht. The part that you don't see is that wealthy people, generally speaking, have a mindset where they build up not just a high net worth, but the composition of their net worth is in what we could call productive assets. So they have a significant proportion of their assets in things like a investment property, in a stock portfolio, in a factory that pays them rent, in a business interest, in some artwork that is generally appreciating, or some other classic car collection that appreciates in value, generally speaking. The reason that matters is when you have 80% of your net worth in assets that are generating income and growing, even if your income is 300,000 a year and you're spending 320,000 a year, your net worth will be growing because the majority of your assets are generating income and basically increasing in value. The issue that happens for most people is as they build their asset base, they build the majority of their assets in lifestyle assets. Things like, I want my first car and I want to buy a brand new car and I want it to be really nice. Okay, a house is a necessity in some ways. I want to buy a house, I want to buy nicer clothes, and I want to go on holiday. Those assets, while they do bring you value, they're generally depreciating assets. So your primary car, especially if you buy it new, is not going to really appreciate, very unlikely. and it's going to cost you a lot of money to maintain. So if you buy a car for 50,000, that might be 50,000 of assets in year one. Year four, that might have depreciated. So you need to be careful in the composition of what those assets are. So that's the final point I wanted to finish on. Track your net worth, have a overview of what your assets and liabilities are. But once you've done that, go a level deeper and say, okay, which of my assets are going to lead to financial freedom? Which of my assets are going to lead to a situation where actually my net worth is growing so that I'm not just relying on my sole income?